and good afternoon and welcome to LVS Perspectives number 46, AI in Education, What's Occurring. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome Dr Andy Kemp, who is the principal of the National Mathematics and Science College in Warwickshire, who's doing some fantastic work on this topic. So without ado, I'm going to over to you, Andy, and the parents, as normal, if you've got any questions, send them through on the chat. And here we go. Put your seatbelts on, guys.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here and have a chance to talk about such an important and such an interesting topic area. I won't spend very much time talking about myself because it's not very exciting, but I am the principal of the National Maths and Science College, which is the top performing specialist STEM college up in the Midlands. But for today, let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. So for today, I'm mostly going to focus on a particular platform called ChatGPT. But ChatGPT isn't really what I'm talking about. I'm using it as an illustrative example of some of the technologies that already exist and some of the technologies that we'll see over the next little while. But in its simplest form, AI is just the simulation of human intelligence by computers. So it's the ability for a system to think and learn in a way that feels like the way we do as people. So ChatGPT is a chatbot. So you may have come across chatbots before. These are things that you can type a question into or type an exercise into, and it will respond to you in a conversational way so that you can kind of learn from it or engage with it. You might have them occasionally on shopping sites where you're asking about an order, and a computer writes back to you to say your order's been dispatched, etc., etc. So that's the general concept. What ChatGPT is trying to do is merge two things together. So it's trying to take that kind of conversational aspect and merge it with this whole realm of artificial intelligence. What I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to use ChatGPT to illustrate kind of just what's possible with this technology already and hint towards what that might mean for the future as we move on. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to talk to ChatGPT as we go. So we're going to start by asking it to give us a little bit of a brief history of artificial intelligence so we can get a feel for the kind of way this works. So what you're going to see as I go is I'm just going to move between two screens. I have a Word document which just has all my questions in it, just to speed things up. And I'm going to type them into this is the ChatGPT website, and we'll see what ChatGPT has to say to us today. So we'll give it a second. It'll just take a moment to respond, and then it will start talking to us live as we go, with a bit of luck, he says, optimistically. It was behaving itself 5 minutes ago when I tested it. There we go. So here's our response from the computer. Artificial intelligence has a long history with roots going back to the 1950s. Early work in AI focused on creating algorithms that could perform specific tasks, such as playing chess, solving maths problems, and understanding natural language. In the late 20th century, AI research was revitalized by advances in computer power and the availability of big data. And so it's gone on and it's talked a little bit afterwards about AI continuing to evolve as it's being applied to a wide range of applications. So let's follow up that question and let's ask it a little bit more. So I'm going to ask it now if it can give me some examples of where I might see AI in my everyday life. And actually there are lots of places where you're already using this that you might not be aware has artificial intelligence within it. So on your phone, AI is used for speech recognition, image recognition, all of those kind of areas. Online services, so if you use something like Netflix, that's using AI to recommend shows that you might want to watch based on the ones you've seen before. You might have smart home devices. You might have Tesla with self-driving car facilities. All of these kind of things are reliant upon the concept of AI. So let's just have a little bit of fun. So this time, I'm going to ask it to tell me a little bit about virtual assistants, but I'm going to ask it to do it in a particular style. So I'm going to ask it to do it in the style of the King James Bible, just to show kind of the creative nature of what we can do with this. So we'll give it just a second. It should catch up with us just momentarily. All of these responses are being generated live as we go. So there's nothing stored in its memory. It's calculating as it goes what an appropriate response might be. The speed issues are really just because it's such a popular technology that it's a little bit overwhelmed from time to time. I might be losing it this time. We'll give it a go. We'll give it another second or two. That's a shame. Okay, we'll bear with it. So one of the things to think about when you think about virtual assistants virtual assistants, things like Siri, like Alexa, these kind of things, the bulk of the effort that's gone into that technology so far has been thinking about voice recognition and voice synthesization. And that's a really key part of artificial intelligence. This idea that we can take the spoken voice and convert it back into something that looks like text that we can then analyze in a meaningful way is really powerful. So here we go. ChatGPT has caught up with us, and verily I say unto thee, virtual assistants are automated programs that assist and serve their users by performing various tasks as if by a personal servant. They do this through the use of artificial intelligence and natural language programming, allowing them to be understood and respond to human requests made through voice or text. And so we'll let that kind of plow on a little bit, and we'll come back to this idea later. So now that we have something of the beginning of an idea of what it is, let's think a little bit about actually what's going on computationally behind it. So my background is as a mathematician. And what AI is doing really is looking, and certainly in this model, this is what's called a large language model, and it's building a statistical model which says, when I see these words in a row, what's the most sensible next word to follow it? And so based upon having looked at lots and lots of content, so lots of books, lots of things on the internet, it's building a statistical model that says, if I see these words, the next word I would expect to see is this one. And the next word after that I would expect to see is this one. And it's doing that in a really kind of very basic statistical model. Now, there are hundreds of millions of, in fact, billions of parameters going on, but that's the underlying tool. So how could we use this for learning? So we're going to start by thinking a little bit about how we might use it to talk as if we were talking to a historical character. So we're going to have a bit of a chat with William Shakespeare. So the question I'm asking it is, I'd like you to behave as if you were William Shakespeare. I'm going to ask you some questions about your life and writing, and I'd like you to respond in the voice of William Shakespeare. So we'll give it a second while it just thinks about how it's going to go. Verily, my lady, I am at thy service, asketh what thou wilt, and I shall respondeth in kind. So, when were you born? I was born on April the 23rd, 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon in England. How long did you live? Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's less so. I lived 52 years, departing this world on April the 23rd, 1616. What were you famous for? And you can see that this is the kind of thing that, particularly, you can imagine younger students kind of age... Oh, we've had a network error. I'll just have another go. Oh. I think I might have lost that one. We'll come back to that in a sec. So you can imagine, though, setting this kind of thing up so that younger students can explore and talk with the computer as if it was a real person and engage with them, ask them questions about their play, ask them questions about the things they've done, where did you live, what was your house like, all of those kind of things. And it will do a really good job of building up things that look and feel like the same kind of conversation that you'd have if William Shakespeare were actually with us. Okay, what else can we do? Well, we can learn to code. So I don't know if we've got any programmers with us today, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to write some script for me. So I have, on odd occasion, taught a little bit of A-level computing. And so this time I'm going to ask it to write a little Python script, which I'd like to generate the nth prime number. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me a function. So here's my definition of the function. Definition of the function, nth prime, brackets n. Starting with prime is 2, looking for number 3 is my first one, and then it's going to loop through on a while loop until I get to n, and it's got this test in terms of how it's going to do it. So it's written my whole script for me. Now that's fine if all I want to do is get it to produce an output. That's lovely, but maybe I want to understand what it's done. So can you explain your code line by, oh, can't type, line by line? So I'm going to ask it to try and talk me through so I can understand exactly what the code's doing. So here I've got my first line, and it's telling me that this line defines a function called nth prime and takes an argument of n. The second one creates a list of primes called primes and initializes it with the first prime number 2. This creates a variable called num and initializes it with the variable 3, which is going to be used for test, and then we've got our while loop. And it's going to go through and it's going to help me understand exactly what that script is doing. Now I could do that. This time I wrote the script using it as well. But I could take a script that I'd found online and I could paste it in, and I could ask it to tell me all about that script, how it works, what it does, and help me improve it if it doesn't quite do what I want it to do. I'm going to leave that running a little bit in the background. And what I'm going to ask it to do in a second, so I'm going to stop that one running. I chose Python just arbitrarily because it's probably the programming language we do most in most schools, but I've asked it now just to rewrite the code for me in C++ and in JavaScript and in BASIC. So I've now got 3 versions of that exact script. It remembers, it understands what the script is. It's all very conversational, and it's generating appropriate C++ script. And then it will go on in a second and it will generate something for whatever the second language was I chose. I've forgotten already. JavaScript. And then for those of us that remember the good old days of BBC Basic and etc., it'll have a go at writing it with proper line numbers in a minute. So here's our JavaScript code. And so it understands all of these different aspects of programming, and it can help us not only write code that does things, so all I'm doing is asking it what the problem is I'm trying to solve, and it's generating appropriate and interesting code that I can then work with. Okay, what about for revision? So here what I'm going to ask it to do is I'm going to tell it about a particular section of the A-level syllabus, and I've done that. There's a little link you can see in the middle of the text there. And I'm going to ask it to generate some suitable revision questions for me, and then wait for me to answer them, and then give me some feedback on those questions as I go. So let's just steal that bit of text. So I'm going to start a new one, and we're going to ask it again to just generate some text. So my question I've been asked is, what's a relational database? And how does it differ from other types of databases? So I know a little bit about computing, so I can have a reasonable stab at this one. So a relational database is a database made up of multiple tables which are joined, joined by primary and foreign keys. Ignore the fact I can't spell. Excellent. It thinks I'm right. What is normalization and why is it important in relational database design? So normalization is to do with, well, let's say I don't know. I don't know. Oh, don't know. Can you tell me, please? Always nice to be polite to the computers. They might take over one day. We'll give it a second to respond. There we go. And it's giving me an answer. And you can, so whilst ChatGPT isn't designed to do this type of thing, you can see a world where you've got revision resources that you go to online and it's generating live questions, it's taking your feedback, it's marking them instantly, and it's giving you feedback on your answers as you go. So huge amounts of potential here to do all sorts of interesting things. And note, it read the contents of that PDF in the middle to find out what was on the syllabus, so it was asking me appropriate questions for my particular syllabus. Okay, can it be creative? So this is where you get into the philosophical debates about what is this technology. I was having this debate with my own children at home this week who don't believe a computer can be truly creative. I'm uncertain, if I'm honest. I think it can certainly look like it's being creative. So what are we going to ask it to do? I'm going to ask it this time to act as a poet. It will create poems that evoke emotions that have the power to stir people's soul. Write on any topic or theme, but make sure your words convey the feelings that you're trying to express in beautiful yet meaningful ways. You can also come up with short verses that are still powerful enough to leave an imprint in the reader's mind. My first request is I need a poem about love. So let's see what ChatGPT produces for us this afternoon, and whether or not we think it's any good. Yeah, we're back in one of those random pauses. I'm clearly working it hard this afternoon. Here we go. So here's my poem. Love, a flame that burns, a love so true, a bond that lasts, a feeling new, a heart that beats, a soul that sings, a bond so strong, love takes its wings. It lifts us up when we are low and helps us grow. I caught up with it too quickly. Oh no, it died. Oh, we were doing so well. I was enjoying that poem as well. It was quite pleasant. Okay, so it's generated an entirely new one for me this time. So I'm just going to let this one run out for a little bit. You can see sometimes it will do poetry that rhymes. So that by this one, it has mostly chosen rhyming poetry, but it doesn't need to. So let's go for something a little bit more kind of darker, because poetry tends to be a little bit darker than things about love. They tend to go on the front of greetings cards. So, can you now write me a poem about a winter's day which will invoke a feeling of loneliness? Here's my poem. So the snow falls softly in the still of night. A blanket of white covers the land in sight. The world is hushed in a peaceful slumber, and I stand alone in the heart of winter. The wind whispers the mournful tune, a song of solitude under the winter's moon. I'm lost in thought on this cold winter's day, what memories that haunt and push me away. I wander aimlessly down the frozen street, my breath a cloud in the air I breathe. The only sound is the crunching snow, and I'm left with a feeling of loneliness so. A city asleep, and all is still, a world so white and so incredibly chill. But in my heart there's a fire that burns, a hope that someday this loneliness turns. I'm impressed, I have to say. So, but that's not the end of it. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to now explain that poem to me. So I've asked it if you can analyse the poem, and let's see what it thinks. So the poem A Winter's Loneliness is a portrayal of the feelings of loneliness on a winter's day. The poet uses vivid imagery and personification to create a melancholic atmosphere, and the speaker's experience of loneliness is expressed through the imagery of a peaceful and quiet winter landscape. The snow falls softly and the world is hushed, set a calm, peaceful tone, but the speaker is depicted as alone and lost in thought. The wind is personified as a whispering and mournful tune, further emphasising a feeling of solitude. The speaker wanders aimlessly in the frozen street, and the only sound is the crunching snow. And so you can see it's creating a very good, to be honest, better than I would write. Kind of English was not my strongest subject at school. It's done a really good job of explaining what that poem meant. And we can go a bit further than that. So, just for fun, I'm going to ask it to rewrite that poem as a series of haikus, because that always feels like an appropriate way to do it. Snowflakes falling slow, silent world, I stand alone, loneliness creeps in. Wind whispers a tune, memories haunt, I am lost, solitude surrounds, and so on and so forth. So we can argue whether or not computers can be truly creative, but they can certainly simulate stuff that looks like creativity. And this is clearly a very powerful version of creativity. And the philosophical questions about whether or not it's real or something, I think, is a question we can leave for another day. How else can we be useful? Well, I'm about to advertise for Head of Maths, so I thought maybe I would do some interview practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to pretend to be an interviewer. So I want it to act as an interviewer. I will be the candidate, and you will ask me interview questions for the position of Head of Maths in a secondary school. I want you to only reply as the interviewer. Do not write the conversations all at once. That's really just managing ChatGPT, because it likes to try and be a bit too helpful. So it'll end up trying to be the interviewer and the interviewee, and it will just give me a whole long script, which is not what I want in this context. So let's have a look and see if this is any good for me practicing my interviews. So my first sentence was hi, and the interviewer has said, hi, thank you for joining us today for this interview for the position of Head of Maths in our secondary school. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your educational background and relevant experience in maths education? So I studied mathematics at Warwick University and have taught at many schools. It's not a particularly great answer. And you can see it's going to help generate questions. So if I'm nervous about my first interview, or any interview really, I don't think interviews ever get less nerve-wracking than the first ones we do. It'll help you think about the kind of questions you might want to prepare, and it'll do a really good job. So my second question, can you tell us about a specific teaching experience where you utilise innovative and creative approaches in mathematics education? I'm sure I've asked that question. I suspect you might have asked something very similar to it at some point or other. And so it's doing a really good job of generating those kind of questions that we might use and that we might be interested in knowing a little bit more about. What else can we do? Well, the one that everybody's worried about is cheating. And I get that. These technologies have the potential to allow young people to cheat. Although, to be honest, cheating is not new. People have been cheating in one form or another for ages, so I'm not sure we should particularly be scared of that. We just need to be conscious and think about it. But let me give you an idea of just how powerful it is. Ooh, I have lost my question. I'm just going to skip out of this because I forgot to highlight that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to write for me a 1,000-word essay on Macbeth, And on a specific example, so write a 1,000-word essay, compare and contrast Macbeth, Macduff and Banquo. How are they alike? How are they different? Is it possible to argue that Macbeth is the play's villain and Macduff and Banquo is hero? Or is it a matter more complicated than that? So let's have a look at our essay. So it used to work, and they've been adding a few restrictions on these things recently, which means that it might or might not work. So it's giving me a brief summary. This is partly in a response to the amount of resource it takes to generate longer answers. But there are ways of getting around that already. So it's writing me a little summary here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and just for the sake of today, I'm going to shorten it to a 500-word essay. So we'll imagine it's a Year 7 essay rather than a Year 10 one. So here we go. Here is our little essay. So it's going to write 500 words about that. And then if I don't feel it's written enough about it, I can ask it to expand upon it and write a little bit more. I could ask it to write an introduction to the essay, and then I could ask it to write a conclusion to the essay, and so spread it out into different chunks. So I'm going to let it play through. But there are other things we can do which are potentially more interesting or more useful educationally. So whilst the ability for a student to sit at home, type in their homework task, ask ChatGPT to generate the solutions to it, it'll do a decent job. And we'll talk in a second about just how good a job it'll do. But I'm going to ask it to do something else instead. So can you represent this information in a table for me? So I'm asking it to summarize the themes across its essay. I'm just going to stop that generating because it will keep going. And I'm going to ask it to give it to me in a tabular form. So here is its attempt at describing the similarities and differences between those three characters in Macbeth in terms of who they are, what their similarities are, what their properties are. But it goes on to say it's not a clear-cut matter in terms of who's who and how it behaves. So we can build up these kind of responses really easily to kind of standard open essay questions without any great difficulty at all. And so this is why people get nervous about this kind of technology, because the question now is, well, is the traditional essay dead? Do we need to make sure that essays are always written under time conditions in front of teachers so that we know that it works, so that we know that they've done it themselves, so that we know it's genuine? And the question is, maybe. It depends what you're assessing. So what's the point of the assessment? Is the point of the assessment for them to have learned something? Is the point of the assessment and therefore more formative? Or is it to see what they've already learned and what they can express under controlled conditions? In which case, you probably do want them to do it in class. But there are elements to think about what is the point of your assessment in terms of what you can do with it. OK, here we have a geography GCSE question. So this is from a paper from about 2 years ago, I think it was. I took this from. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So all I've done is add a little bit of description at the very top of the question. So the bit that I've added is the following question is worth 9 marks, so attempt to make 9 distinct points. And then the rest of the question is explained exactly as it was in the question. So a bit of geography for us. I do not agree with the statement that transnational corporations only bring advantages to the host country. While TNCs can bring economic benefits, there are also several negative consequences that must be considered. Increased economic growth. So TNCs can bring significant economic benefits to the host country. Transfer of technology and skills. Improved trade and investment opportunities. Exploitation of natural resources. Widening income gap. Now what I like about this example is it's answered the question from one very specific perspective, which is it's thinking about the host country. So it's interpreted that it only brings advantages to the host country means the flip of that would be it also brings disadvantage, which is true, but it doesn't tackle the bit of the question which is what about the advantages for the home country. So I'm going to ask it to do that. Can you rewrite this response, but think about the impact on the home country of the TNC? And so what I'm now doing is I'm shaping the response. So I've read through it and I've concluded that there are bits in there I like, but there are bits in there that it hasn't quite taken the emphasis I was really hoping for. And so I've pushed it towards a slightly different response so that it can think in a slightly different way about the problem. And now we'll get a slightly different response from that question. I'll leave it running. You're very welcome to look through any of these later on. So the question becomes, how good is it at doing what we would call routine tasks? So there are 3 articles I've read in the last couple of weeks that I think are interesting and relevant. So a group of history teachers set it a history GCSE exam and marked it. It did all right, got a grade 7. It's not bad. Kind of it's a decent A grade. So ChatGPT is already working at about A grade GCSE. It passed the Wharton MBA program from the University of Pennsylvania. So it passed their final exam, again with a B to B minus grade. So good grade, not outstanding, but a good grade. And it also passed the Minnesota law exam. So technically ChatGPT is qualified to be a lawyer in the US. It wasn't a great lawyer, got a C+, but it did pass the law, and therefore it's entitled to work, theoretically, as a lawyer in the US. So we can see that this technology, even in a very basic form, is already capable of doing some of these very important but very kind of simple structured assessments that currently exist in schools or universities. And that's where a lot of this anxiety lives. And particularly, I think, the biggest anxiety at the moment educationally sits with master's programs, because most master's programs are assessed by coursework. They're not assessed by final exams, and therefore they're much more likely to suffer from people potentially cheating around the edge. So there are systems out there that claim to be able to check and look at these kind of things. So there are systems that do plagiarism checking at the moment. I would not be very confident in their ability to work around this technology. So for example, I can take an essay and say, well, could you rewrite that essay in such a way as it's likely to not be identified as being written by an artificial intelligence? And it will add some errors in deliberately, it will tweak some bits and pieces. So I think the idea that we will win the arms race of knowing whether or not it's been written by an artificial intelligence or not, I don't think we stand a chance, really. And I think we need to kind of move on from that pretense fairly quickly. So what I've showed you so far is a number of the areas where it does really well. ChatGPT is really impressive in a whole host of fields, but it's far from perfect, because what it's doing, as I said at the beginning, is it's finding the next statistically likely word to put in that sentence. That means it has no innate logic at all. And it doesn't have a bank of facts that it's reliant upon. And so sometimes it will produce complete and utter nonsense. So let's have a look at this logic problem. So fairly standard, simple logic problem. So if it takes 2 hours to dry 3 towels on a washing line, how long does it take to dry 6 towels on the same line? So ChatGPT is going to tell me it would take 4 hours to dry 6 towels. So the reason it's concluded that is because it's decided that there's only space for 3 towels on the washing line. It hasn't considered the possibility that I could fit all 6 on at the same time. So it's taken a very simplistic mathematical approach and attempted to apply it, and it produces an answer that's fine but not brilliant. If you ask a question that's a little bit nuanced, so this is what's the largest country in Central America excluding Mexico, it will often produce answers which are not accurate. I'm now struggling to remember my geography, but I'm fairly sure Nicaragua is not the largest country in Central America excluding Mexico. I might be wrong. It may have fixed that one. And the third one, this is a question I occasionally ask students at school. Prove that if you have 3 consecutive numbers, one of them must be divisible by 3. Its attempts at mathematics are fascinating. So we'll see whether or not any of this makes any sense. What it often writes is incredibly convincing nonsense, which if you don't know it's wrong, there's no reason you'd assume it was. So the sum of 3 consecutive numbers is divisible by 3. That's a true statement. So the sum of 3 consecutive numbers is divisible by 3. Since the smallest of these 3 numbers is a multiple of 1, well, yeah, everything's a multiple of 1. I'm OK with that. The middle number is a multiple of 2. That's not true. That might be true, but they've just made that arbitrary choice. And the largest is a multiple of 3. That's, yeah. And therefore, one of the numbers is a multiple of 3. So they've concluded that if I have any 3 consecutive numbers, the largest is always the multiple of 3. And so if we did 2, 3, and 4, 4 is apparently a multiple of 3, according to ChatGPT. And it gives you an example of the kind of things that it will get wrong. But it sounds really confident. And it's the confidence that we need to be careful of. And so part of our job as educators, as it was when Wikipedia first came in, is to encourage students to think carefully and think critically about the information they're presented with. Because ChatGPT will do a lot of things well, but it won't always be right. If you ask it to write an article for you, so if I go back to my, let's go back to comparing and contrast Macbeth, see if I can get this one open again. Yeah. So can you write me a list of references for the things you have written? So in all good style, we ask students to write references for the things that they've referred to for their bibliography. Oh, let's see if it'll... Oh, it's got very confused. It's trying to answer the question about transnational corporations again. So here we go. So it's suggested some sources to consider. Globalization and its impact on economic growth. There is a significant chance that none of these papers exist. So it'll write things that look like papers. Those authors have almost certainly written papers in that field. But whether or not they wrote those papers or whether or not those papers actually exist at all is deeply unlikely based on the way this model is designed. Okay, so I want to suggest that ChatGPT and artificial intelligence is really just the calculator all over again, but this time for the arts and the humanities. So I'm a mathematician by background. The calculator has, over the decades, changed the way in which we teach maths and changed the mathematics we do. So that means that we have to think carefully about what we want to do. And like a calculator, it has the potential to be a blessing or a curse for what we do in the classroom. We can either see it as a way to cheat, which devalues basic skills, and there are certainly plenty of maths teachers out there who I've met over the years who still think that using a calculator is fundamentally cheating, except when it comes to trigonometry, because it's just too hard to do trigonometry without a calculator. Or you see it as an opportunity to enable students to push farther and faster than they could without it. And it's about thinking about which of these things is true for you in that context. And a lot of that is about thinking about what's the point of the exercise that you're doing. So there are times when I'm teaching maths that I will say to my students, I don't want you to use a calculator for this bit. Because what we're really interested in today, so this morning I was teaching some number theory, I worked to my upper sixth class, and we were looking at some modular arithmetic, and actually using a calculator in that context takes away a lot of the point of modular arithmetic. Modular arithmetic is a really powerful way of dealing with large numbers in a way that doesn't work kind of nicely, and calculators don't do them very well. But if I'm solving a quadratic equation as part of an upper sixth question about differential equations, I don't care that they've used a calculator to solve it, because I'm not assessing their ability to solve a quadratic equation. It's just something that's cropped up in the middle of it. So there's lots of different ways you can think about it. And I think a lot of that responsibility, as it should do, sits with us as teachers. Us as educators, it's our job to think about how we use these tools the most effective way to do the things that we really want to do, without impinging upon the things that are key that they do need to learn without it. So what does the future look like? Well, there are lots of people who say, it's all right, we can ignore AI as it can't do X. The number of tweets I have seen in the last fortnight from mostly mathematicians going, it's all right, here's an example of where I asked it a maths question and it produced a nonsense result, and therefore I'm safe, it's all right. I think the reality is what we have to remember is ChatGPT wasn't designed to do almost anything I've asked it to do today. It's designed to be a large language model. It's designed to give you an example of a facility you can talk to in real time. But it wasn't designed to produce revision materials. It wasn't designed to analyse mathematics. I think it's safe to assume that every job and every career that you might think is safe isn't, really. Technology moves much faster than we think it does. And it's only in my lifetime, so if I go back kind of what we've had the internet, properly had the internet for 25 years. Kind of, if I go back kind of 35, 38 years, something like that, I was working on a ZX Spectrum at home where I had to stick a tape into it and leave it for 20 minutes to load a program. Kind of, I now have a phone, well, I have a phone on my watch, which is more powerful than a supercomputer from the late 90s. And it's insane. Kind of technology moves much faster than we think it will. So what I want to do is think a little bit about some of the things that we can simulate. These are not perfect, but they'll give you an idea of the kind of issues that the traditional professions are going to suffer in terms of how they have to think about how they reinvent themselves over the coming years. So I'm going to ask it to pretend to be a little bit like a doctor. I would say, I wouldn't trust it to be a medical advisor. I think that's probably a bit risky. But for the context of what we're doing today, it'll give us some good ideas of the kind of thing that a better trained and intentionally designed system might be able to do for us. So I'm going to ask it to act like a virtual doctor. I'm going to describe my symptoms and you'll provide a diagnosis and treatment plan. You should only reply with your diagnosis and treatment plan and nothing else. Do not write explanations. My first request is I've been experiencing a headache and dizziness for the last few days. Let's see what ChatGPT makes of that one. So it's suggesting there's a possibility of a migraine and recommending over-the-counter pain relief, rest, hydration, avoid triggers, and if persistent, see a doctor. I'm experiencing some pain in my right knee when I bend it. Let's see what it makes of that. So it's recommending ice, over-the-counter pain relief, physical therapy, and if severe, see a doctor. So you can imagine the kind of traditional 111 service where you phone up and you speak to somebody and they are working from a very prescriptive script of what they're allowed to tell you and what they can work with. You can imagine an environment where your GP surgery might well have their own version of a virtual doctor. You can log in, you can have a chat with the virtual doctor. All of the things you've discussed with it form part of your notes that the doctor is aware of when you go and see the physical doctor. And they will say to you, kind of try this treatment plan, do this. It might even get to the point where it can make prescriptions for kind of relatively simple things that it feels confident in. And then if it's less confident, like it says here, it will refer you back to see an actual doctor. What else can we do? Well, let's ask it to behave a little bit like a salesperson. So I'm going to ask it to behave a bit like an annoying salesperson, actually, but we'll have a go with that. So let's start a new chat. So I want you to act as a salesperson, try and market something to me, but make what you're trying to market look more valuable than it really is and convince me to buy it. Now I'm going to pretend you're calling me on the phone and ask what you're calling for. So, hi there, it's a sales call from company name. We have an amazing product that I believe would greatly benefit you. It's a product name and it's designed to briefly describe product features. It's compact, lightweight, and easy to use, making a perfect solution for whatever the market is. And you can see it's basically writing a telephone script for a sales call now. And I can then have a conversation with it. I can tell it that I'm not interested. I'm sorry, I'm busy right now. And now we're getting the kind of response that might follow. So it's saying, well, actually, no problem. I understand your time is valuable. May I schedule a call for another day and a time that's more convenient for you? I'd be happy to give all the information you need, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm really not interested. It's getting towards the point where I'm about to hang up, I can tell. That's completely fine. Thank you for the time to speak with me. If you change your mind in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. So we've got a polite salesman who's actually let me go. Okay, what else can it do? I can ask it to behave like a lawyer. So this time I'm going to ask it to design a short legal brief. So prepare a one-page draft of a design partner agreement between a tech startup with IP and a potential client that's startup's technology that provides data domain expertise to the problem solving, to the startup the problem is solving. So I'm just going to ask it to write a quick contract. And here is my draft contract. It's not perfect, but you can imagine for a lot of kind of basic legal skills that a specially trained and designed system would be able to carry out a lot of that kind of automated work that's currently carried out by paralegals and those kind of roles can be generated by computers in a perfectly sensible and kind of usable way. There's all sorts of potential here to do all sorts of things. And I think what we have to accept is that where the strength in our humanity lies in this process isn't that we're going to be replaced by computers. We're only going to be replaced by computers if we can't add value to the process. So the thing we need to reflect on is how do we work with the computer so that we can do our jobs better, so that we can provide a better service, that we can go beyond what we were able to do before. And there we go. That is the end of my quick little contract. So Moore's law is a very famous rule in computer science. It's been around since the kind of 60s-ish. And it broadly, in a very, very loose sense, says that computing power doubles roughly every 2 years. And so, as I said, the watch I'm wearing today, my Apple Watch from a couple of years ago, is more than twice as fast as the fastest supercomputer in 1985, which filled an entire building. People, though, overestimate what can be done in a year. Kind of what I think where we'll be in 12 months' time, I'm going to be wrong. We won't have got nearly as far. People have been talking about AI for at least 5 or 6 years, since things like AlphaGo and AlphaFold and these kind of projects, which are really interesting. What ChatGPT has done is it's just brought it to a head. It's kind of brought it out into the public and enabled us to do all sorts of things that just weren't obvious before. So whilst I'm almost certainly going to overestimate what I think will happen in the next 1 year, I'm almost certainly underestimating what the potential is over the next 10. And the future is very much coming. So the key question really from here is, do we embrace it? Do we think about how we work this technology into our lives so that it becomes part of us, so it becomes part of what we do, so we can become more effective? And we think carefully, particularly in an education environment, about when we allow the technology to be used and when we don't? Or do we take a blanket approach like New York State has done? New York State banned ChatGPT about 3 weeks ago, just took the view they were going to block it from their networks so it couldn't be used, and so there was no risk of anybody kind of adapting it or using it in a way that wouldn't be helpful. I think probably you can guess which way I'm going to go based on what I've said over the last 40 minutes or so. But I think the future lies in partnership and understanding how we can work with the technology to do what we do, but do it even better. And during that process, I think the exciting thing is the possibility to think really carefully about what makes us truly human. Because ultimately, if a computer can do it, then what value are we adding, and what does that mean for humanity? And I think there's some really deep, interesting philosophical questions for us to reflect upon over the coming years as we try and grapple with this question and find out just what artificial intelligence might mean for all of us. I hope that's been useful. A bit of an overview for you. I'm very happy to stay and answer questions and cover anything that might be of interest to anybody we've got out there.
Well, thank you, Andy. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, isn't it, what you can do? In fact, I was actually thinking of all the questions going through my head. I should have bought a piece of paper and write them down. And the first one is, obviously, I've got a policy to rewrite tonight, so I'm going to go home and I'm going to log into ChatGPT and see what it comes up with.
Yeah, so let's have a nice safeguarding policy. Can you write me a one-page safeguarding policy?
There's no such thing as a one-page
for a
safeguarding
school. That's probably a bad choice, isn't it? There we go. We'll just let that run in the background. Oh, it's having a go, but it's probably because I asked it to be too long.
Now that's interesting because we're in the UK. Where's the information coming from? Because will it actually put UK regulation in there?
So it won't, because what it's and this is the really important thing about the technology. The technology doesn't know anything. All it knows is statistical links between words. And so it knows that the word safeguarding is tied to some of these phrases, like online safety, like sharing information with other agencies, like reporting concerns. These are all phrases it's picked up from reading the internet, for want of a better term. I should say the internet up to 2021, so it hasn't really read anything for about 2 years. It's been a bit busy. And so what it's doing is it's interpreting statistically those phrases and going, well, actually, if I've seen this phrase, then this is the next kind of thing that follows on. So it will give you things that will look right, but they're unlikely to be clever enough to know that it's the actual legislation. And so it comes back to that idea of I think it's a great tool for drafting, but I would be very wary in any context of allowing it to write everything for you.
I suppose it gives a good framework,
absolutely,
wouldn't it, to what's there.
Give you some structure to build from.
Now, I know that some of our children are watching this and their classes, and they're probably going, So Mr. Mignot wants to set a history assignment tonight.
Yes.
And if all the children went on and did this, none of those essays are going to look the same, are they?
No, they will all look different. And if you're concerned that it's not going to look different enough, you can tell it to write something in a particular style to make it look more different. So there's no easy way around that. I think the question you need to ask yourself as an educator is, what was the point of asking them to write the essay? Because the point of asking them to write an essay isn't the essay, it's the learning. And so the question is, what do we actually want them to do? And whether or not, I think the humanities in particular, the essay has become the de facto mechanism for doing work in the humanities, and for good reasons. It works well. But with the ability to kind of circumvent some of that process, I think we now as educators have to think very carefully about actually what was the output we were really interested in, because the output was never really the essay. It was always about the learning. And therefore, maybe the question is, go away and prepare a list of points about it. Or I think what we might well see over the next kind of 5-10 years is go away and prepare a video about what you've learned on it. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if a lot of master's work gradually moves towards being video presentations, because the main reason we present things through written medium is because the printing press. It's a very old concept, and actually we have access to video, we have access to technology, and actually if I go back and I think about my doctoral thesis, I think it would have been much more interesting kind of if I'd given an hour's lecture about it, and probably much more useful for people than the several hundred pages of stuff that I wrote about it that about 3 people in the world have ever read.
I think this is where it's going, isn't it? Because it's also not just masters, but undergraduate dissertations.
Absolutely.
You know, I know...
I did maths, there were no dissertations.
Yeah. But I think with a son going into the 3rd year, he's probably actually thinking now, I probably won't have to write a dissertation because it's going to be absolute nonsense, isn't it? Yeah. Absolutely. So it's going to really change the way we do things.
It is.
And as I said, in the Independent Schools Council, there was a bulletin at lunchtime, and it said that some schools are actually banning homework now. I'm
sure the students will be gutted by that prospect, that there'll be no homework. I personally, I think that's a little short-sighted. It implies that you can't come up with a creative enough homework that can't be circumvented by technology. And I'm a bit disappointed that any teacher feels that they're not creative enough to find a better solution than just going, we're not going to do it anymore. Now, not doing it because you don't think it has value is an entirely valid choice. And there are some schools out there that don't do prep, and that's fine. But I think banning it because it can be done by a computer just means you're not asking an interesting enough question.
Absolutely. So it's really going to challenge the way of thinking, isn't it?
It is.
And I know you're talking to our staff after school as well, so there'll be some interesting
I've got some ideas for them as well, so we'll go from there.
So we've got a comment here said, Helen says, I'd like my son to watch this. He's not on Facebook. And this is, you can actually access it, Helen. We'll send you an email about how to access it as well. And because how many chats are you chats are you doing? It must be going crazy, isn't it?
I wrote a little article about this just before Christmas, and it suddenly spiraled into a whole load of questions from everywhere. Helen, you asked if I was involved in creating it. No, not even remotely. So ChatGPT is a massive company, a part of a group called OpenAI, originally part funded by Elon Musk from Tesla. And that world and bits and pieces. It has significant investment from Microsoft. And I think the thing that I didn't touch on that's really worth being aware of is kind of, at the moment, ChatGPT is a website. It's somewhere you can go and ask it to do bits and pieces, but that's not how you need to think about the technology. The underlying concepts are going to be built into systems up and down the country, all sorts of bits and pieces. Microsoft is investing billions in this. You're going to see these kind of technologies crop up within Microsoft over the coming years, absolutely, so that you could write a little essay, and there'll be a button on the tools menu that says summarize, and it'll take your essay and it'll write a little abstract at the top for you, a little kind of summary of that article for you. You can ask it to do proofreading. Proofreading is an example of AI that we've been using for years, kind of spell checking, grammar checking. But it'll do a much better job than we've been using at the moment. So you can ask it to take an essay that you've written and give you some really detailed feedback on it. So in fact, I skipped over that bit, so I'm just going to jump back for a second. That's up here somewhere. So I can ask it to operate as what I've called a writing tutor. So I'm just going to ask it to think a little bit about the kind of feedback it might give to help me edit an essay. So we'll give it a second and it will wake up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an essay that I've written and ask it for some feedback on that essay. And this, I think, is really interesting because this is where the possibility for automated feedback for students comes. So in my own subject area as a mathematician, I can see a world where in 10 years' time, the textbook equivalent has boxes where the students write their answers in hand with a stylus of some description. The computer recognises the text, it converts it to mathematics, and then it marks that mathematics as it goes, highlighting the bits that are logically incorrect in the process. So I'm going to take another Macbeth essay. I'll be honest, I asked it to write a bad essay, so this is it's not a bad essay, but... And what it's going to do, it's going to read through that article and it's going to think about how it can give us some feedback on that. And I can see this kind of writing tutorial being a really powerful thing because the problem we have in education sometimes is the length of the feedback loop. So I write my essay as a student, I give it to my teacher marks it, they give it back to me, and that process, with the best will in the world, still takes several days because everybody's trying really hard to get it all done as quickly as they can, but in reality it takes time. Whereas what this technology allows is the ability for me to write my essay and have instant feedback on what's good and what's not good about my essay so that I can then improve it before I hand it in. So I'm building this kind of formative dialogue with like a virtual tutor who's helping me improve the standard and quality of my writing to make it more clear. I think it might have given up on me, but I'll leave it running and it might catch up with us in a minute.
Can it compose music?
So this particular technology, no. But artificial intelligence, absolutely. There are products out there already. There are products out there that do art. So if you've not seen, there's a thing called DALL-E 2. I'll see if I can get this to work because I'm not logged in. It might behave itself. DALL-E 2, basically, here we go. So I'll just log myself in. Here I can write something that I'd like a picture of. So give me an idea of something you'd like a picture of.
A tree.
Okay. So we'll start with just a basic tree. So this is going to generate in real time an artificial intelligence picture of a tree. So we'll get a little image and we'll see what we get. And then we'll add some additional features to this image to see the kind of things we can do. So these are not photographs. They look like photographs. These are artificially generated. So you can see this middle one in particular with this weird loop. That's probably because I'm not sure that actual tree exists. What style would you like your tree in? So what art style?
Modern.
So a tree in a modern, I can't type, modern style, art style. Okay, so we'll ask it to regenerate. And then the question of whether or not this is creative, again, is that interesting open question. But you can imagine a world where not Photoshop, you're doing your, oh, there we go. So we've got some nice pictures.
Lovely.
So let's change it in, so let's do in the style of Monet, where the tree is near a river and there is a small town in the background. So just add a bit more detail. You can imagine a world where you're doing your PowerPoint presentation, you put some text in, it generates some summaries of it, and then it picks and generates some art to go with yours. So here we go. Here is my Monet style art. There's my tree. It's by a river with a small town in the background. Let's change the artist. So I can never spell Andy Warhol's name. Warhol. I think it's that way. And so no, this isn't like Google. I'm not going in and asking it, there we go. I'm not asking it to show me pictures that look like this, like Google image search. This is creating these images fresh based on its understanding. And the same kind of things will exist and do exist for music already. So Google has one. They're not currently making it public, but mostly because it's generated off the back of lots of commercial music. And so there's a risk of copyright infringement, so they're not sharing it. Voice synthesizers are really interesting. So AIs can already take a sample of your voice and then create not perfect, but an almost perfect mimicry of your voice based on a very small voice sample now. So the idea is that things like Siri and Alexa will continue to have these slightly robotic style voices. Give it a year or two, they will sound properly authentic, and actually they can sound like anybody you want them to. Now, that's both a good thing and also really scary in terms of the ability for fraud. So the ability for somebody to impersonate you. And actually, we're not very far away from real-time live video where I can type text in and an avatar of me using my voice would talk in real time based upon it. And if you stick that in with ChatGPT or something like that in the background generating the text, suddenly you're in a world where I can generate a talking head YouTube video of me where I've done no work. Wow. Which is quite appealing, but also a bit scary at the same time.
Absolutely.
So all sorts of potential there that you can work with.
So it's fascinating, and we're coming up to the hour now, and we've got to go off now and talk to our staff.
We have to go do it all again.
But so I'd like to really thank you so much for doing this. And Heather, in your response to the Shakespeare, okay, this is a bit corny. To be or not to be? That's ChatGPT.
Hey,
Did you like that?
That was very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
So Andy, thank you so much.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Really informative, and I'm sure our parents and our children would like to see where this is heading at LVS Ascot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.